Deputy Michael McGrath sharing with
Deputy Cohen.
Deputy Barry Cohen.
Thank you very much, Ciaran Corla. Ciaran Corla, having somewhere to call home and access to a public health system when you need it.
Quiet for Deputy McGrath.
Thanks, Ciaran Corla. Having somewhere to call home and accessing a public health system when you need it are among the most basic needs of any citizen. For any society that regards itself as modern, decent and compassionate, meeting these needs is the foundation on which the rest of society is built. This budget will ultimately be judged on whether it takes policy on housing and health in a new direction and helps to deliver better outcomes. Ciaran Corla, the truth is the government has failed to get to grips with the housing crisis. It is the government that has executive authority. It is the government that controls the Department of Housing. It is the government that is responsible for addressing the housing crisis, and it is the government that must accept that its performance on housing has not been good enough. Budget Day helps to set the direction of policy and, at its simplest level, provides the money. It is the day-to-day management of government business that delivers on the ground, and this is where the government is falling down in relation to housing. We haven't been short of big launches and PR events, but we have been short of homes built. Policies are being announced, launched, then re-announced, relaunched, but not implemented in practice. The follow-through just has not been there. And outside of the bubble of Leinster House, the daily grind of getting things done is what matters to the people we all represent. And this government needs to get back to the politics of getting things done when it comes to housing. And when it comes to the housing crisis, the overall message to government is to cut the obsession with PR and with spin and focus on delivery, delivery, delivery. At the very front line of the crisis, the number of people sleeping in emergency accommodation is a national scandal and a scar on our nation at this time. This government gave its word to those living in this nightmare that no one would be in hotel accommodation on an emergency basis by July 2017. The government didn't just miss the target by a few weeks or even a few months. 15 months on, the number of people in emergency accommodation has hardly moved at all. You would need a heart of stone not to be moved by listening to the girl called Amanda on Morning Ireland last Friday morning, who has spent 2 years in a hotel room with her family. And the reality is there are many more Amandas out there. Almost 3,700 children are homeless and will sleep in emergency accommodation across our country tonight. This can never be regarded as the norm or as acceptable. And the state must lead from the front in tackling the crisis by getting back to building public housing in a sustained and ambitious manner. We welcome the additional funding allocated to homelessness and the increased allocation for the construction of social housing. It is a step in the right direction. Under this government's watch, home ownership has become a distant dream for more and more of our people. Home ownership rates are falling rapidly under Fine Gael. That is the record. Fianna Fáil makes no apologies for insisting on a major focus on affordable housing in this budget, and today's announcement in that regard is a breakthrough, and now it must be put into effect. We have secured a €300 million affordable housing package over the next 3 years, including over €200 million of new exchequer money. This will provide thousands of homes which will be made available to eligible first-time buyers, and these homes can be sold at up to €50,000 below the cost of building the home, subject to an overall maximum discount of 40% of market value. On health, we need to know, Minister, that what we have before us today is an honest health budget. We have not been privy to all the over and back between the HSE, your own Department of Public Expenditure and the Department of Health in recent weeks, but we are left with the distinct impression that the whole process has been quite chaotic and, as always, very, very late in the day. And I have no hesitation in saying that it was the most difficult area in our negotiations in relation to getting any feedback about specific measures or even about the overall settlement and the allocation for health in 2019. And I'm not suggesting you held anything back, Minister, I don't believe you did, but it seems to me that even the process of agreeing the health budget is crisis-driven. not just the running of the health service, but agreeing the budget itself is crisis-driven. In the coming months, we are facing a supplementary estimate of some €700 million, and this year the government has been bailed out by an unexpected corporation tax windfall. But this is not a sustainable basis for funding our health service. We have consistently argued for the need for a credible multi-annual budget for health. We have secured an extra €20 million in funding in 2019 to tackle waiting lists through the National Treatment Purchase Fund. The scandal of children with special needs waiting up to 3 years for an assessment of need must be tackled, and the extra funding that we insisted upon is welcome in that regard. On the current side, health is getting, by my estimates, around €1.5 billion extra in 2019, above what was originally allocated for 2018. For that, people will expect to see better access and better services across our health system. We need accountability in health, and the Minister needs to ensure that this extra money delivers on the key priorities. Ceann Comhairle, almost 2.5 years ago, Fianna Fáil made a historic decision to enter into a confidence and supply arrangement to ensure this country had a government. Back in May 2016, there was no shortage of predictions that we'd cut and run at the first opportunity, that we wouldn't honour the commitment we gave. And I'm not going to say it has been an easy or a comfortable position for us to be in, because it hasn't. But despite constant provocation from most quarters in this House, we have stood our ground and we have kept our word to the Irish people. From opposition, we have sought to influence budgetary policy and move it in a more progressive direction. We have provided the political stability necessary for Ireland's economy to grow. We have brought about a noticeable shift in the make-up of budgets, with an overall emphasis on investment in public services and increased capital investment. This was the very platform that we campaigned on in 2016. This is the third budget under the agreement, and I'm not here to say we got everything we wanted. We're not in government. There are no ministers over on this side of the House. We're not in charge of any government departments, but we have had some influence on some measures, at least in this budget, and on the overall mix between expenditure and taxation. And rather than being a spectator, we have sought to use our influence to positive effect. And in today's budget, we've made progress on a number of crucial policy areas on behalf of the Irish people. The increased investment in services and vital infrastructure is about 4 times greater than the money allocated to tax cuts. Capital investment in our economy will increase by about 1/4 next year. And we welcome, Minister, that the overall general government balance will broadly be balanced next year. I do note that there will still be a structural deficit of about 0.7%. I understand the technical reasons around that in relation to the output gap and the calculations, but nonetheless it is disappointing that again we are missing the medium-term objective of a structural deficit of not greater than 0.5%. Ceann Comhairle, on income tax, the package today is certainly modest. But to make no change to our income tax system, as some would have suggested, would actually result in people paying more tax next year. And Fianna Fáil would not have supported a €3.5 billion budget package that actually made people worse off. We made a commitment that we would secure reductions in the universal social charge, with an emphasis on low and middle incomes. And including the cut in today's budget, we have secured reductions over the last 3 budgets in the 3 USC rates. The 1% rate has been cut to 0.5%, the 3% rate has been cut to 2%, and the 5.5% rate has been cut to 4.5%. And some USC bands have also been widened. We believe these gradual reductions have reduced the burden of USC in a fair and a sustainable way. On income tax, we support the increase in the entry point to the 40% marginal rate of tax by €750. Fianna Fáil believes that people in Ireland entered a higher rate at too low a level of income, and this is an important step. And again, if no change had been made to the tax system, over 60,000 taxpayers would have moved up to the higher rate of tax next year, and many more would be paying more of their income at the higher rate than they were in 2018. As incomes rise, a static tax system means people pay more tax. That is a simple reality. So some changes were absolutely necessary in this budget, and we defend and support that decision. The combined effect of these income tax changes is that an individual or couple with an income of €45,000 per annum will gain the most as a percentage of their net income, coming in at around 0.7%. In the budget negotiations, Fianna Fáil made a particular push for an increase in the home carer tax credit. This is a credit given to married couples or civil partners who are jointly assessed for tax, where one spouse or partner works in the home caring for a dependent person, including children or a person with a disability. For many of them, the €300 increase in the tax credit is €300 straight into their pocket. This will be of real benefit to couples where one spouse or partner stays at home to mind children or someone with a disability. It is my experience that many people entitled to this credit are actually not even claiming it, so we would urge people couples who are largely relying on one income to check whether they may be in a position to benefit from this relief. Last Friday, the Minister announced that Ireland is set to receive an extra €1.1 billion in corporation tax receipts this year. No doubt this is a positive development, but the growing reliance on corporation tax, and within that on a small number of companies, is now a key risk facing the economy and indeed the public finances. And the point here is that while on this occasion the announcement was of €1 billion extra, the question has to be asked, what if it went the other way? If the Minister had to announce last week that we were going to receive €1 billion less corporate tax in the remaining months of this year than expected, then we would be in a very different environment going into this budget. So if we cannot predict corporation tax receipts with any degree of certainty, then there is a real exposure. In 2011, corporation tax receipts stood at €3.5 billion. Here today, in 2018, we are set to receive €9.6 billion from this tax heading. Corporation tax receipts now account for over 17% of the total expected tax take in 2018, with 40% of it coming from just 10 companies. And another even more startling way of putting that is that about 7% of all tax we collect as a country is now coming from 10 companies. It's great while it lasts, but we have to face up to the fact that it is now a risk for Ireland. Corporation tax is an extremely volatile revenue stream. The UK and the US are lowering their headline rates. The European Union is stepping up its efforts to bring in a common consolidated corporate tax base and some form of digital taxation. The OECD's base erosion and profit shifting programme is ongoing, and it all means that the global corporate tax environment is changing, and changing rapidly. And if just a handful of companies were to change their tax structure, Ireland could stand to lose billions of euro. All of this underlines the importance, from our point of view as a party, of making a start, of putting some money away as a contingency or a rainy day fund, which we proposed in 2015 and negotiated in the Confidence and Supply Agreement. This fund is set to be established next year, and it's supported by a whole range of international and domestic bodies as an important fiscal buffer. The European authorities have been very positive on this initiative. The easy part is saying we have learned the lessons from the past. The hard part is making policy changes that give effect to that in a tangible way. Some future Minister for Finance will, in a future government, be glad that this initiative was taken, because it may well allow our country in the future to avoid the type of tax increases and spending cuts that had to be implemented when the last crisis struck. We need to protect ourselves in the event of a fiscal shock. Against the backdrop of a balanced general government budget, the establishment of this fund is an important reform and one we fully support. The dependence on corporate tax receipts from multinationals is also a warning to government of the need to place a greater focus on the thousands of SMEs operating in the domestic economy. SMEs in Ireland employ in the region of 900,000 people and are the real backbone of our economy. Despite the strong economic rebound, life is tough for many of them. Insurance is an enormous problem for a growing number of firms, something our party has highlighted in this House on countless occasions. Other costs too, and emerging labour shortages make trading conditions difficult for many of them. In the budget discussions, we highlighted the need to improve the taxation environment for SMEs and entrepreneurs. We are disappointed that no specific changes have been announced today in relation to the Employment and Investment Incentive Scheme, but I note your words, Minister, about the Finance Bill, and we will engage with you on that. This scheme can provide vital early-stage funding for businesses. And the Minister has an Indecon report making recommendations as to how it can be improved. A good place to start would be to streamline the application and approval process and give the revenue the resources they need to improve turnaround times. We also shared with the Minister the feedback we have received in relation to the share-based remuneration scheme, the key employee engagement programme, or KEEP. The uptake on this scheme has been weaker than expected, and we welcome the changes the Minister is providing for in this budget. We also welcome the extension of the 3-year start-up relief for a further 3 years and the extension of film relief. The time-limited regional uplift in the film relief is an important initiative. Our capital gains tax regime for businesses and enterprises needs major reform, as it is currently uncompetitive when set against the jurisdictions with whom we compete. CGT is simply too high for people wanting to invest or start their own company. We had asked a consideration be given to increase the €1 million lifetime limit in the CGT entrepreneur relief, but this was not possible, or the government did not decide to do so on this occasion. We as a party commit ourselves to improving the CGT environment for SMEs and entrepreneurs into the future. We look forward to discussing a number of these enterprise tax schemes with the Minister and others during the course of the Finance Bill. One area, Minister, I believe a greater focus is needed within our domestic economy is on the retail sector. Irish retailers employ across 45,000 businesses about 282,000 employees. While many of them are competing effectively in the online space, many more are struggling to keep pace with the surge in online shopping. You need to improve as a government the supports available to them under the Digital Trading Voucher Scheme. Just as Enterprise Ireland assists firms developing export markets for their goods, internationally focused retailers now need help and increased supports to take on the global consumer market. If we don't step up our efforts in this area, more and more Irish businesses are going to fall victim and not be able to keep pace with the surge in online shopping and be unable to compete in that space. Minister, we acknowledge that the decision to raise the 9% VAT rate in the tourism and hospitality sector to 13.5% was a difficult call for the government to make. While the 9% rate was successful, it was always designed as a temporary crutch until the sector repaired itself. There is little doubt that many businesses, particularly in the food sector, will not be able to absorb the increase and will have no option but to pass it on to consumers. The tourism and hospitality sector has had the benefit of the reduced rate for 7 years. In line with the obligations on us under the Confidence and Supply Agreement, we will be abstaining on this vote in the House tonight. As the 9% rate comes to an end, it is worth remembering today how it was funded in those early years following 2011. A staggering €2.5 billion was taken from the private pension savings of hundreds of thousands of workers and pensioners across this country by the last government. This raid has had a lasting effect and has resulted in the pensions of many thousands of current pensioners and future pensioners being reduced forever, and that issue needs to be borne in mind when the VAT decision is being debated. The Confidence and Supply Agreement provides for a supportive tax regime for the self-employed and the introduction of a PRSI scheme for them. The further increase in the earned income tax credit is to be welcomed, and Fianna Fáil recommits itself to the policy of bringing this credit up to €1,650 to match the POE credit at the earliest opportunity. The extension of job seekers' benefit to the self-employed is also an important reform and will provide an important safety net for self-employed people whose business gets into difficulty. In relation to Brexit, Ceann Comhairle, it really is the dark cloud that is hanging over this budget. This budget and a whole lot more could unravel very quickly if Brexit goes badly wrong. On March 29th next year, just over 5 months from now, the UK is set to leave the European Union. Negotiations are continuing, and we have little clarity on what the future relationship will be between the UK and the EU, including Ireland. Brexit remains the most serious political and economic challenge facing this island in many decades, and the potential impact on people's lives, both north and south, should not be underestimated. The Good Friday Agreement was signed 20 years ago. The agreement and the peace it underpins should never be taken for granted or put at risk. The majority of people in Northern Ireland, from all sides, voted to remain in the European Union. We cannot accept the return of a hard border on our island in any shape or form. The consequences would be far more profound than the obvious economic effects. We have had various predictions of the effect of a no-deal Brexit, and I don't need to restate them on the record here in this House today, but they are clearly severe and profound. Fianna Fáil continues to believe that Northern Ireland should be given the status of a special economic zone, and there should, under no circumstances, be a hard border. While we support the government in negotiations, we have deep concerns about the lack of readiness here in Ireland for all eventualities. And I note in that regard from today's budget booklet, provision is being made for some 270 extra revenue staff, presumably customs officials. We were told in July the government had approved the hiring of up to 1,000 customs officials and veterinary inspectors. The provision in today's budget appears to be for 270 customs staff. I don't see a separate provision under the Department of Agriculture vote. Perhaps that can be clarified. But more importantly, in a PQ reply to ourselves just last week, you confirm, Minister, the revenue will require an additional 600 staff because of Brexit. You said, based on a scenario of a transition period after March 19 and a future trade agreement between the EU and the UK, and you also confirmed that revenue aims to have about 200 customs officers in place by the end of March in 2019. So in other words, if everything goes well and there is an agreement and there's a transition and there's a future trade deal, revenue will need 600 customs officials. But by March of 19, we will have 200, and we have no certainty as to the outcome of the negotiations by March of 19. There is a clear issue there, a gap and a real exposure for our country in that regard. So if we have a cliff edge Brexit, which none of us want to see or perhaps expect to see, Ireland will not be ready by March 2019, despite the government having had 2 years of notice of the March 19 date. And in the context of well over €1 billion of trade over and back across the Irish Sea every week, this is a worrying prospect indeed. It is crucial that every possible support is given to businesses to prepare for Brexit. The farming and agri-food sector is, as we all know, particularly exposed and needs special supports. On budget day last year, a €25 million loan scheme for Brexit for the agri-food sector was announced. It never happened. In practice, there's now a suggestion will open up perhaps early next year, having been announced in October of last year. Given the industry's vulnerability, this is simply not good enough and speaks volumes about the lack of delivery on this area. SMEs too need extra support. We had announced last year again the SME Brexit loan scheme, a €300 million fund, which was finally launched back in March of 2018, some 6 months after the budget. And according to the latest statistics we have, to the end of June, 10 SMEs have progressed to the finance provider approval stage, with less than 1% of the €300 million pot actually lent out to businesses at that stage. And only 127 companies out of almost 2,700 have received the Be Prepared for Brexit grants from Enterprise Ireland. So these are very identifiable, tangible measures where we're not delivering the type of supports and the safety nets that are needed. One final point on Brexit. Given what is at stake, it is understandable that the focus has been defending what we have. No border on the island of Ireland, the need for free trade north-south and east-west to continue unimpeded. But Brexit also opens up huge opportunities for Ireland, and the message that needs to go out from all of us and from government consistently to the international audience is that Ireland is very much open for business, very much open for extra investment when the UK leaves the European Union in March of next year. And the government needs to focus on this aspect, as well as also dealing with the immediate priority of defending the here and now and what we have. One issue I just picked up on the budget booklet, again the assumption around the exchange rate is that it will remain at €1 for 89 pence sterling right the way through 2019. Now you may say that's based on the central scenario of a deal, a transition period, but that could go very much the other way. There could well be a very significant fall in the value of sterling through 2019, which would have a real immediate and severe effect on the capacity of export businesses here in this country, Ceann Comhairle. Ceann Comhairle, as we enter into a critical period of Brexit negotiations, I know everyone in our party, Fianna Fáil, and I'm sure everyone in this House wishes the government, the Irish officials and the EU negotiating team every success in the coming weeks as they seek to get the best deal possible for the European Union and indeed our country. I think it is important, Ceann Comhairle, to put on the record, apart from Brexit and the dependence on corporation tax, some of the other risks that are emerging in a very evidential way in our economy. There's a significant risk of overheating and a loss of competitiveness. We experienced it before. Real capacity constraints are emerging. We're seeing labour shortages, particularly in construction, and our competitiveness ranking is something we have to be very conscious of and keep a very clear and focused eye on. In relation to the housing crisis, the lack of progress on broadband, transport blockages, the cost of doing business, these are all concerns in relation to Ireland's competitiveness and the risk of overheating. Making good quality broadband available in all parts of the country would be transformative for parts of Ireland, and faith in the ability of this government to deliver the national broadband plan is ebbing away at an accelerating rate. Delivering this plan is vital to our national interests and essential if we are to bring about any degree of balanced regional development. People want to know, will it happen and when will it happen? The cost of living is rising. While the headline figures may show prices broadly stable, when you delve down deep into the CSO statistics, you find that all of the costs that families and individuals cannot avoid, whether they be transport costs, energy costs, interest rates, rent costs, all of those are rising at rates well above the headline CPI inflation rate, motor insurance premiums, petrol, diesel and so on. That is a key risk, and it's also a major issue now which is affecting families on a day-to-day basis. As we all know, we're facing the threat of an ever-escalating tension surrounding trade, and as a small open economy, we are acutely vulnerable to global trade disputes and growing protectionist policies. And with the Trump presidency, the risk of an all-out trade war cannot be completely discounted. While we have not been significantly affected to date, higher tariffs on more goods will impact on us sooner or later if there's not a change in direction. Fianna Fáil, as a party, believes in free trade. We believe that breaking down trade barriers can benefit more people, and the evidence resoundingly supports this. There are difficulties, of course, with free trade, but the benefits very much outweigh the costs. Among the remaining legacies of the financial crash is Ireland's large national debt, which currently stands at over €200 billion, €43,000 per person, on a per capita basis, the third highest in the developed world. Fortunately, for now, we are living in an era of very low interest rates, but it won't last forever. In 2014, the interest on Irish government debt was predicted to stand at €8.5 billion by 2018. In fact, because of the direction of interest rates and ECB interventions and so on, it's going to be about €5.5 billion. So €3 billion less this year on an interest bill compared to what was forecast for this year a number of years ago. Inevitably, this will come to an end at some point in time. The ECB is eager to return to normal monetary policies, to unwind its quantitative easing programme and to start to increase interest rates, perhaps as early as the latter half of 2019. This will mean we will pay more on our debt, which will have a significant impact on future budgetary decisions. I highlight all of these issues, Ceann Comhairle, really to lay down a marker, because when you look at all of these risks, it is hard to escape the conclusion that one or more or a combination of these risks will materialise over the period ahead. Economic conditions have been very favourable for Ireland over the last number of years, and as a result, the economic rebound has been stronger and faster than most predicted, stronger and faster than the government predicted, stronger and faster than independent economists and analysts predicted. But when you examine the profile of the risks we're facing as a country, we would be very naive to believe that this will last forever. This makes it all the more important we engage in better long-term planning and forecasting. Fianna Fáil supports the reforms in the budgetary process. In fact, it was a feature of the Confidence and Supply Agreement. We now have, finally, a resourced Parliamentary Budget Office, and it's a fantastic resource for all members across this House, and particularly for the Budgetary Oversight Committee. We, as a party, called on the Government for 5-year forecasts to be provided as part of today's economic and fiscal outlook, and they are now set out within the booklet with forecasts right up to 2023. That's an important measure. In relation to climate change, Ceann Comhairle, the latest report from the UN's Climate Change Advisory Group makes for very grim reading. It really does paint an appalling vista. And while the focus today will be on the government's decision not to increase carbon tax or excise on diesel, we need to see a greater focus on the positive measures that are needed on the climate change agenda. There is an urgent need for more investment in sustainable transport initiatives. We need to see better grants for retrofitting buildings. We need to support renewable energy in a meaningful way, and we need to put consistent policies in place. And I'll give you one example on that front. Local authorities right around this country are grappling now with planning applications for solar farms, and they have not yet, despite asking for the last number of years, been provided with a national policy or national guidelines to guide how they are to assess and deal with those applications. And it's symptomatic of a lack of coordinated national policy on climate change. Just in May of this year, the EPA said that Ireland will achieve a 1% reduction on 2005 emission levels by 2020, instead of the target of 20%. This is an appalling performance, and one that will cost us dearly, both financially and from an environmental perspective. Ceann Comhairle, the Fianna Fáil party entered into discussions in this budget with a focus on the issues that really matter to people in their everyday life: housing, health, education, their cost of living, improving the tax environment, and indeed on other issues. We campaigned in 2016 on the promise of an Ireland for all. We didn't win the election, but we gained some influence through the agreement we entered into. And even from opposition, we have to date done our best to give effect to our policies, and we can point to a range of specific measures we have delivered, while at the same time providing the political stability that most people in this country actually desire. And I look forward to working with the Minister, the other opposition spokespersons and all deputies on the detailed scrutiny of the finance bill in the weeks ahead. Thank you very much, Lass.